Hello, welcome to Bear in Mind presents Around the World in 50 Films. We are landing in our last location for our tour around the home countries. We're landing in
Yeah.
Scotland today, and we're taking
hmm
a look at a 2015 adaptation of a Scottish play, as it's called. Not a Scottish
Yeah.
play, written by an English playwright, Macbeth from Shakespeare.
Yeah. We are reviewing the Scottish film. So,
We
or is
did,
it?
well, yeah, there was a bit of a debate between us on how Scottish this film is, but we didn't want to go for something obvious like Train Spotting, so we went for something as equally as obvious for a different reason.
Yeah, I
But
think. Go on. Sorry.
it's got Scottish money behind it. It's predominantly filmed in Scotland, so we thought it did fit the criteria.
Yeah. I think, as you say, I think the obvious contemporary choice was Train Spotting or Train Spotting 2, or maybe doing a double bill of watching the two of them. There are, of course, unlike other smaller parts of the United Kingdom, like Wales, Northern Ireland, and even the Republic of Ireland, it's not technically part of the United Kingdom, but like for the purpose of this series, Scotland has had a long a long history of the film industry, whether it be films actually made in Scotland, Scottish money, Scottish setting, Scottish writers, Scottish directors, actors, etc., etc. So there was a much more rich choice to go with, and some excellent films as well. I think it also came down to our usual rules of it has to be something that we can get easy access to without pirating.
And if any of you are wondering where you can watch this, if you're in the UK at least, it is currently on Amazon Prime.
Yeah, I actually rather enjoyed it. So I
I
think
like the film. I own the
mm,
film on Blu-ray.
yeah, I mean, I didn't actually bother checking the price of purchasing it, but like for how rare owning a Shakespeare film would be, I wouldn't be against having this in my collection, to be honest.
I
So
have a few.
yeah, so
I like
I don't.
Shakespeare though.
I mean, I'm. I think Shakespeare's an odd one because I think like a lot of people in school, I never quite got it, and I think that was partly because the teachers that taught me Shakespeare never quite got Shakespeare either.
I
So it
think I
was.
thankfully had an English teacher who thought Shakespeare was exciting and
Mm,
imparted that as much as she could within the British education system's real desire to make Shakespeare seem boring.
I think it was to make Shakespeare seem boring, but I think there's also the thing of if you don't quite understand Shakespeare, and in particular,
I,
like I mean, Shakespeare speaks in metaphors. Like
I also I thoroughly believe teaching kids Shakespeare by making them read the plays is the wrong way to teach Shakespeare.
yeah, because I
Yeah,
mean, I mean, even the format of a stage play, like reading a stage play, is so much more difficult than reading a book. Because
yeah.
reading a book obviously has all of the descriptive language in there as well, whereas reading a play, or well, reading a script of any kind, there's a lack of description, and therefore it's much harder for many people
Yeah,
to get a
I
grasp.
I had the teacher who made us watch a lot of Shakespeare instead,
Mm,
and I think it worked for me. And I think both me and you have worked on some Shakespeare productions as well, and I think that cemented my enjoyment of
yeah,
Shakespeare.
I think it certainly helped me like grasp it a bit more. I also think just as a like over time learning to write as well. I've matured to a point where it was I found it remarkably easy last night to kind of interpret what was going on. because obviously when you watch Shakespeare, it's not a different language, but it's right on the edge of the end of Middle English, really,
Yeah.
and the beginning of modern English, because it was around those times that the printing press and dictionaries and stuff like that first came into being, and as such, linguistically, English has actually changed quite a lot. I mean, I was discussing it with my wife last night that it's shocking in a way to think that it's only around 200 years difference between Shakespeare and Dickens. And
Yeah.
Dickens, linguistically, although he writes in an old style, linguistically, Dickens is actually, you could mistake him for being contemporary. You could have a
There's
writer
no
now.
major break between how
Mm,
Dickens speaks and how we speak.
not really, no. I mean, you could definitely have someone ghost write a Dickens story now, and it not necessarily be any different. It would fit in. I mean, like even with TV, like there was that Taboo, the Tom Hardy thing.
Yeah.
That was deliberately written by Hardy and his father to be a Dickensian novel that never was. So, but yeah, it's just an interesting thing to think about how much it's changed in such a little time.
I've noticed in previous episodes of this, we have recommended a couple of things that people could watch. This isn't specifically Scottish, but Shakespeare. There's a recent BBC sitcom called Upstart Crow.
Yeah, in the last 4 years or so.
Yeah, Ben
Yeah.
Elton, the same person who did Blackadder,
Mm.
but taking on it's a sitcom about Shakespeare and him
And
traveling back and forth between London and his home.
It's absolutely wonderful because it's not obviously historically accurate. There's not enough about Shakespeare himself.
Yeah,
In fact, obviously, there's all the conspiracy theories that Shakespeare didn't
which it
exist,
does
um,
wonderful things with. To
which
be
it
fair,
does talk about in the sitcom. But it's in the same way that Blackadder isn't true history, but makes humour of real history. This is brilliantly written. So well worth doing. Well worth having a look for. But
BBC iPlayer, I
yeah,
think.
yeah, it's on the iPlayer. I'm not sure if it's available elsewhere. I've got a feeling it's on. It might even be on BritBox for
Yeah,
people in other parts of the world. But yeah, on to Macbeth, our Scottish choice. Now, I say not.
casted.
Sorry.
It's a well casted film, I think.
Excellently casted film, with Michael Fassbender playing the lead character, Macbeth. He is magnificent in this. Not that you expect anything less from him, of course. Then we've got Marion Cotillard, the French actress,
It's Lady
famous for,
Macbeth.
as Lady Macbeth, famous for things like Inception, Dark Knight Returns. No, Dark Knight Rises. Sorry. Um, Very famous French actress, Paddy Considine and David Thewlis. Now, obviously, none of them are Scottish. Fassbender being German Irish as well, and his Irish accent does sneak through at times. But the vast majority of the secondary, like of the support cast, are all Scottish. Most of the film is filmed in Scotland. In fact, there's only a few external shots of not Hamlet, of Macbeth's castle, which was shot across the border here into England.
Yeah.
That's Bamber Castle, also referred to as Bebbanburg Castle in The Last Kingdom on Netflix.
I like the choice in the film to go for a more, like, I think quite often when you think of adaptations of Macbeth or Macbeth in general,
mm,
think of big castles, big
mm.
kind of, and I liked the take to kind of go for thatch huts and
Yeah, I mean, it starts in a much more humble kind of castle type of, like, well, noble house, I suppose.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's in Macbeth's original castle in this, it's really just a wooden house, and even the king, even Duncan, when he visits, ends up sleeping in a tent outside of the
Um,
castle.
Probably should, for anyone who's doesn't know the basic plot of Macbeth. Um, so Macbeth is a warrior who fights for the king after a
He's a
battle.
he's a, he's a nobleman, isn't he?
Yeah,
So
he's one of the I guess the earls, kind
that's
of.
yeah. He's a lord of sorts,
Yeah,
isn't he? So he obviously has some land. He
yeah.
has some people under him. Not necessarily a large amount of land at the beginning of the story, but the initial battle that opens the story,
It is
he.
one of Shakespeare's tragedies, not one of
Mm,
his. Was it? No, it's not historical, is it? It would fit under tragedy.
I'd say it's a tragedy, yeah. Because I mean, we'll go into it later, but
Yeah,
Macbeth was a real person, but he was nothing like the Macbeth of the story. Um, but yeah, it's one of his tragedies. So it's very grim. It's very sad. It's very heavy, like incredibly heavy. So it is certainly a film that you've got to be in the mood for,
it's
not just because of the language,
it's about a
but
man
mm,
who meets three witches who convince him to commit regicide.
yeah,
Well,
essentially.
they don't really convince him, but
Well, I mean, they do and they don't because
they give
they
him.
they they
They make a
tell him,
prediction. Every
yeah,
choice he makes after that is his and his wife's.
mm, I'd argue it's not even his. I'd say it's his wife's because she's the real power
Yeah,
in this story,
and
and
that's
it's
I'd say that's a recurring theme throughout most Macbeths. To be fair,
mm, but I mean she's powered by grief, as is arguably the whole film. The whole film is
yeah,
about the power of death and the power of grief. 'Cause in the interspersed in the opening sequence of the fight, the big battle that Macbeth is fighting, you see the funeral of Macbeth's child, and his only child
yeah.
with Lady Macbeth, and so she is powered by the grief, powered by the loss for the entire film. Well, the entire story, whether it's film or the play, and she has been bent and twisted, and in this particular interpretation, they've sexualized her quite a lot. That she almost gets off on dark things, and she has a great power um, over Macbeth, and she's the one
Well,
that convinces him that to reach his future as foreseen by the witches, that he must kill King Duncan.
it brings on an interesting cycle of all of our choices for Great Britain
Mm,
and the British Isles. Sorry, not Great Britain, the British Isles
mm.
have revolved around grief.
Yeah, yeah, I
You
think you're right.
have, yeah, Get Carter
Mm.
is about a man
Oh,
dealing with the loss of his brother.
hmm.
Song of the Sea,
Yeah, is about
you,
the loss of a mother.
yeah,
Um, the resistance is about the loss of freedom and
yeah,
potentially the loss of identity. Um, Mickey Bow and Me. Um, Again, it's the with it being set in the 70s, well, in 1970, it's early enough in the period of the Troubles, that again it's a loss of identity. It's not just the loss that Mickey Bo feels later on in the film, but it's the loss of a united Ireland,
The loss of
and
innocence as
the
well.
loss of innocence, the loss of peace. And yeah, this is very much a tale of grief. And I think it's something that we're an odd culture, really, as
Across
a
these
whole,
islands.
across these islands. In that, I think the Scandinavians are quite famous for being quite somber and quite down, and obviously the current trend for Scandinavian murder mysteries and stuff like that is around, and those that riff off the Scandinavian murder mysteries, like they've become very famous for being quite dour. But I think Britain and Ireland are this really odd combination of kind of looking at the worst of things, but also smiling.
Grief masked by a wry smile.
Grief masked by a wry smile, or a ridiculous joke, and sometimes a really inappropriate joke. Our humour is as sharp as the grief is blunt at times, and yeah, I think because we could have gone completely the opposite way. I think we could have just chosen silly comedies as well. Like we could have started with a Carry On in England and moved our way through, and I think
maybe it says something about me and you as well, Ben.
I mean, maybe it does, and maybe it says something about the climate of this year, of the things that have been happening this year, and as we mentioned last week in Northern Ireland, the build up to Brexit actually finally kicking in. Maybe there is a sense of grief within us, that Britain is maybe not going to be what we like to think of Britain anymore. Which possibly started with Ireland getting their independence, and may end with Scotland getting theirs and Wales getting theirs. Who's to know?
A bad thing if that's the way things go.
If that has to happen, that has to happen. I mean, personally, again, getting a little political here, but I do believe we're stronger together, we're better together. But
if the general populace of those countries,
oh yeah, I mean, I wouldn't fight anyone over it. I'm not going to try and conquer Scotland about it. Like, if they want to leave, they want to leave. Yeah, it doesn't stop me from.
We're giving them less and less reasons to want to stay, aren't we?
Well, fewer and fewer, James. Grammar matters.
Everyone knows what I mean.
I know.
Going back on to topic away from our.
Well, no, I mean it was a little tangent, but I think you're right. It is it's quite fitting, I think, that our choices have been the choices that we've made. How did you find the language in the film?
I found it fine.
Yeah,
it's for the most part what I would expect from a adaptation of Shakespeare.
I quite liked it. I think again, I mean, this was what you'd probably call an abridged version of Macbeth, because Shakespeare was famous for having 4.5 hour, 5 hour plays, and this is just shy of 2 hours, and that's including the credits. So they've had to obviously cut certain bits out here and there, but I thought they actually did a really good job with this.
I think one thing you get is a lot of Shakespeare films feel like filmed stage plays.
Yes.
This is generally cinematic.
Yeah, I mean, this is a film. Like
stunning.
Oh,
cinematography throughout this film.
This is one of the most beautiful films you'll ever see. Like in a grim way, but like as far as cinematography goes, this is up there with the best.
The last 20 minutes of this film, the final fight, we'll call it.
Oh, the lighting in that was madness.
Orange smoke. The whole film is just cast in orange as Macbeth meets his fate at at Macduff's hands,
Yeah.
which again is grief coming
Mm.
through because at this point in the film, Macbeth has killed Macduff's family.
I mean, there's a wonderful line actually. It's, "Let grief be the whetstone of your dagger of revenge," or something along those
Yeah.
lines. And it's, I think it's the that one line fully describes the entire film, well, the entire story. So every single step is about grief dictating your next move.
And Macbeth is a villain, a tragic villain,
Mm.
but a villain nonetheless. And especially in this adaptation, I think it can vary from adaptation
From
to adaptation.
adaptation to play, yeah.
But even in like Macduff comes wanting vengeance,
Mm.
and even in his death, Macbeth kind of denies him
Yeah.
that. He
Mm.
There's such a level of patheticness to him at that point.
Yes.
There's
But I
such
think, sorry, go on.
no, if
No, I think it's. I mean, as you say, it's this particular adaptation that has used some of the subtleties of their choices. But I think it's because he starts the film as a broken man. He starts the story as a broken man. So, and it's very much that tale of. I mean, things can go either way. And for this version of Macbeth, obviously, it goes very, very, very wrong, as it can for anyone. I mean, the like the loss of a loved one, in particular a child, could break anyone, and it just so happens in this case that, given the dangling of the carrot of great power, that Macbeth wrongly assumes will make him feel better and
yeah,
fill that void, fill that thing that's missing in his life, that drives him to commit murder and some horrible, horrible acts.
yeah, and once he steps foot on that path, it's just to darker and darker things.
Mm,
Like Banquo was his friend. He has him killed.
mm.
Like it's
And asked for his son to be killed because it
yeah,
was also prophesied by the witches that Banquo's children would be the kings,
which
the
is a
future.
lovely. We've we've talked in previous episodes of grief as a cycle.
Yeah,
I think Song of the Sea is a film that really shows that if you don't break out of that cycle,
it's
you just
doomed to repeat.
you just keep hurting people in your
Mm,
pain. And this film ending with Banquo's son running into the smoke with Macbeth's sword,
mm.
knowing that it's just potentially going to keep on.
Keep on going and
Yeah,
going and going and going. I think, yeah, it was. I think the particular handling of it this time has been. It was handled very nicely. I think, obviously, in modern times where we've become much more comfortable with talking about things like grief and things like mental health problems as well.
yeah,
And so I think that this interpretation of the story does actually um, uh, make attempts, at least, to look at that side of things. That, like, I mean, this is a very, very, very troubled man. Yes, he is the villain of the piece, but why is he the villain of the piece? Why is he the man that he is? And I think, it's almost a testament to why Shakespeare has lasted this long, because I think that in its heart
it gets to
there
the
is a,
core
yeah,
of people.
of people, yeah. Whether you like the writing, whether you like the language, whether you don't like, I mean, obviously Shakespeare is full of innuendo. He was an
And I think
absolutely
the thing
massive
with
poet.
Shakespeare as well is I think we spend more time focusing on his epics, his tragedies, his history,
Mm,
but there's some great work in his comedies
Yeah.
as well.
But
Yeah,
as you say, he manages to get to the core of humanity. That when he hits the nail, whether it's a serious play or whether it's a humorous play or something in between, that he understands humanity, and that's, I think, the great legacy of Shakespeare.
I know I've said it to you before. I don't think I've said that on camera before, but I I'm on record as thinking sitcoms are one of our greatest art forms for representing people
Agreed.
as they are, as opposed to in some grand drama.
Mm.
I do think Shakespeare would probably be a sitcom writer if he was around today, or a
I
soap
think
writer.
I think Shakespeare would be Ben Elton. I
Yeah,
think going back to Ben Elton and going back to Upstart Crow and the other things that Ben Elton has done, that yeah, if Shakespeare was a contemporary of Ben Elton, he probably would have been Ben Elton. That he would have focused on comedy, but knowing that the beauty with comedy is that you can lull the audience into a false sense of security. You can feel humor, lighthearted, and then when something happens, when something really like it could be as simple as a death, but not a grim death or a horrible death or a murder or anything like that, but just someone dying of old age. It can destroy you. Like I mean, we're both big fans of How I Met Your Mother, and the beautiful episode where Marshall's dad dies. That is a piece of like that is television at its highest form. Where they hide the countdown clock in the episode, and it rips you apart in
or
that final section.
the episode where Brendan Fraser's character dies in Scrubs
Yeah,
as well. That's another one. That's an absolute.
I mean, Scrubs was a fantastic one for that. And I mean, possibly my favorite sitcom of all time, MASH. You couldn't get a more kind of fitting mixture of humor and horror than a sitcom set during a war, actually on the front line, in
Yeah.
a surgical hospital. I mean, absolutely remarkably good TV series. And yeah, so I think
I,
I think actually us having a Shakespeare choice somewhere in
yeah.
our British Isles excursion was well worth having, and I think having Macbeth, even though again you could argue isn't a Scottish piece, is a nice one to end on. I think. I think it's also go on.
I think I've changed my mind on this film as we've been talking about it.
Mm,
I know I said to you before we started filming, I'm not sure if I said at the beginning of the episode, that I think it's not the greatest adaptation of Macbeth, but I
mm,
think it's a stunning looking film.
mm,
And I think I'm wrong there.
mm,
Going back to what I said earlier about how a lot of Shakespeare adaptations kind of feel like short plays, and
mm,
this feels like a film. And extrapolating on that, it uses that cinematic language, like the way we were discussing the smoke at the end, certain
mm,
visuals they use to hammer home the points here.
yeah,
It uses that cinematic language to hammer home the points of a film, of a play.
yeah. Which again, as it's an abridged version,
Yeah.
where there's arguably 2 to 2.5 hours of the story of the overall play missing, the use of cinematics, the use of the tricks of cinema, or
It,
rather the art of cinema, is
it
very
really
important.
is Shakespeare as film.
Mm.
So yeah, I've changed my mind on it a little bit, I think, as we've been talking about it.
I mean, I can totally understand that you might have a version that you prefer because maybe it is a more pure
Yeah.
version of the actual Shakespearean script. But yeah, I mean, I think that for an audience that isn't necessarily fans of Shakespeare, I mean, I'm not a big fan of Shakespeare. I don't consume a lot of Shakespeare. I don't necessarily read it for fun or anything like that. I don't go out of my way to see Shakespeare films. But if it's a group of filmmakers and actors and whatever that I enjoy, then actually I will indulge and I will go for it. Like, what was the Joss Whedon one that he did
Much
after
Ado.
the? Yeah, Much Ado About Nothing. I know that Joss Whedon's not necessarily the most popular man at the moment, but again, a very, very capable filmmaker. And for a bit of fun, he did Much Ado About Nothing in his 2 weeks holiday between finishing filming the first Avengers film and beginning the proper edit of it. And it's a beautifully made film. I've just
Very much
hit it.
feels like a filmed play, though. Going back
It
to
does
what
feel
we've
like a
kind
film
of,
play,
I
but
do
then
think
given that he did it in 2 weeks in his backyard, like I can forgive him for that.
it's potentially why, and I know where people fall on this film is vastly different. But
Mm,
Lerman's Romeo and Juliet,
mm,
that is also, I think, Shakespeare as film.
as cinema, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. No, I
like
totally get you.
that's also uses visuals, uses cinema tricks to tell
Mm.
the story as much as it uses the actors and the performers.
And of course, there are wonderful, like straight adaptation. Well, I mean, not straight, but full-on adaptations where
Yeah,
they've completely modernized the language as well. Like there's again going back to the more comedy side of things, but 10 Things I Hate About You,
yeah,
which Taming of the Shrew. Or even if we're going to go a bit darker again and go from hard fantasy of The Tempest to Forbidden Planet, the great Leslie
yeah,
Nielsen film from the 50s, which is proper good, hard, dark sci-fi, which of course spawned 2000, not 2001, spawned Lost in Space,
yeah.
which oddly enough was an adaptation of Swiss Family Robinson, which is a different old book. So there's two sets of literature coming together from two different sides.
And then for quite some time, I've wanted to watch a lot of, because I've not seen many of them. I've wanted to kind of go through and watch all of Branner's adaptations.
Yes, some of them are excellent.
Yeah,
Right, what's the one? It was released in the 90s and it's got Denzel Washington in.
you do, I think.
Oh, it was Much Ado.
Yeah,
Yes, it was, wasn't it? Yeah, because I remember that. That was a rather pleasant, entertaining
it's
excursion.
one of my Much Ado About Nothing is one of my favourite Shakespeare's. I've not watched every Shakespeare, but the ones I have seen, I do like Much Ado About Nothing. There is a Speaking of Scotland,
Mm,
there is a great. It's a filmed version of a stage play, as
mm.
in it is a film stage play
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
of David Tennant
Mm,
and Catherine Tate
mm.
in Much Ado About Nothing.
Oh,
If you can track that down to watch, it is hilarious. It was just coming off of their time in Doctor Who together. They just, I think, finished season 4 of Doctor Who, and they did that.
see, I think that's another thing. Like with this film, is that there has been a movement in the last 20 years, and I think people like Patrick Stewart can be thanked for this, of high quality, serious actors doing mainstream cinema so that they have enough money so that they can afford to not necessarily get paid well to do
Yeah,
stage or to do smaller Shakespeare films or smaller films as and this feels very much like Fassbender doing that, like Fassbender who'd become a huge mainstream name by this point. Obviously, talking about Patrick Stewart, like taking over Magneto's part in the X-Men prequels. And so you've got him kind of using his name and using his talent and using his connections that he's made to get this film done.
Has McAvoy ever played Macbeth? I feel like he'd make a good Macbeth.
I imagine on stage he has.
Yeah,
I don't think filmed. Yeah.
No, not filmed. Imagine he.
But yeah, he'd make a great Macbeth.
Yeah. So that is. Pardon?
Sorry, I was just gonna continue. I think that another reason culturally this is quite a fitting choice is because, as we've talked about with the non-English home nations, and to be honest, even a little bit with England as well, that England can be seen as the villain a lot, justifiably so.
Well, even within England, the North used the South as.
Well, yeah, and obviously with Get Carter, it predominantly set in the North, and it's the Southerners are seen as some sort of scary villains and things like that. And I think that Shakespeare, obviously, famously, would have written this play in the time, as a way of poking fun at the Scottish. He did with various of his plays. As I say, that Macbeth was a real historical figure, but he, if you look up the historical records of him, he was meant to be quite a nice, well-respected, noble person.
I'm no history expert, but so when I point that a decent amount of Shakespeare's plays, are Tudor propaganda.
Yeah, exactly, and so Macbeth,
Richard III,
yeah,
because it would look like historically, Richard III probably didn't keep princes in his tower and murder them.
And so
king before the Tudors took over, and during the Elizabethan period, there was conflict with Scotland.
Yeah. So this is very much a painting of Scotland in a very negative light of they being somewhat barbaric, almost pagan. Obviously, having the witches as well, even though obviously Christianity had taken its grasp upon a lot of Scotland, especially in the nobility at this point.
And would have been obviously not the point for the play is set, but the point in history when it was written, Scotland was Catholic.
Probably, yeah. Because the point in history when it was written would have been in the 1600s. The play is set roughly in the 1200s. It's definitely one that obviously Shakespeare could have had some poetic license with because it was set 400 years in the past. I mean, it would have been as I say, it's him kind of looking down on and shaming Scotland, as you say, for Tudor propaganda. And I think it's because of the way that the English have behaved over time, especially those in the south, that I think this is possibly quite a fitting one to end on. And ironically enough, it's probably Shakespeare's most famous play.
2.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's that
Romeo and Juliet. Yeah.
It's the top 2.
It is the cursed one, though.
Maybe the top 3 if you include Hamlet as well.
Out of those, it is the one you can't say out loud.
You can't say it out loud. But yeah, I think it's like I don't know. It's somewhat fitting, that this thing that would have started as a dark joke in a way is now this wonderful, rich, deep study on humanity. That whereas Shakespeare may have written them to try and portray them as deeply flawed individuals in a bad way, that actually now they can be explored as deeply flawed individuals in an interesting way, and we can discuss the psychology of it, and we can discuss the humanity of it, and how it actually impacts and is relevant to modern society. It's yeah. So I know we could have gone many other ways with our choice for Scotland, but I'm really pleased with this one, to be honest.
I think on that note,
Yep,
we are putting the balloon away for the Christmas season.
we are. Yes.
Yes.
So
Not
we will be.
not entirely sure what we've got coming your way next. We have got things in the works. There will still be stuff coming from us. I'm just not going to say what in case that plan changes.
Yeah. But at some point on the horizon, there is another season of double feature. So double feature film club will return, as will season 2 of this. Where will we go? We think we know, but it's wherever the wind takes us. And then a few other little.
Balloons are at the mercy of the wind, after all.
They are certainly at the mercy of the wind. So I think we've got a bit of fun coming as well. Obviously, we might return to our Before the MCU series, and we've got some other things.
I will say, if anyone has been watching the Dice Fools, the last episode of that
airs this week.
Yes, might be up by the time this episode, or a couple of days after this episode.
This should air on the usual Thursday or Friday, and then I think Dice Fools is Saturday.
Will be the final.
Yep.
Dice Fools. So that wraps our little Dice Fools miniseries, but we are doing a Christmas special with the same cast as that sometime in December. Don't know when exactly yet.
Yep, probably around Christmas.
That would make sense.
We might even, and this sounds a bit, bit out there, but as you can time things to publish on YouTube, we might put it out on Christmas Day.
Ooh, our own Christmas special.
Yeah, exactly. Or Boxing Day for all the Brits and the Canadians out there. On that note,
for joining us on this tour around the British Isles.
Hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. I've actually really enjoyed this.
So have I.
Yeah, I can't wait for the next bit. So, and we'll see you all soon.